Welcome back to Comic Crackle. I'm your host. Today, I'm with the critically acclaimed and personally acclaimed writer of series like Swamp Thing, The Many Deaths of Layla Starr, Rare Flavors, Justice League Dark, and the upcoming New God series, Ram V. Ram, thank you so much for coming on and talking to me about the new books.
Yeah, pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting, and always nice to talk to someone who takes their fandom seriously.
Exactly. That starting the channel, it was realistically, I think it was some of your work and some of Cy Spurrier's work that
Hmm.
really had me want to write more essays about depicting, some of the messages that I see that others might not, and speaking on it on a little bit of a higher level of the fandom. So just, showing the appreciation where I can. But so first off, I want to talk to you about the upcoming New Gods.
Hmm.
So for people that aren't aware, you, Evan Cagle, and Jorge Fornes are releasing the series December 18th. Can you give a like elevator pitch of the series?
Just a little correction there. It's me and Evan Cagle on the series.
Mhm.
Jorge is one of several guest artists who will be doing small four-page sequences in each of the issues. So issue two will have a different one, issue three will have a different one, four will have a different one. But Evan is the majority of the issue and is constant throughout.
That's wonderful. I wasn't aware, but that's great to see the differing perspectives. I knew that Jorge was going to be on for at least the first issue with the
Yeah, he's
differing
he's on for the
perspectives.
first. He's the guest artist for the first issue. So
That's great. So,
yeah.
can you give a elevator pitch of the series, either New Gods, and then what your take with Evans going to be?
Yeah, I mean the elevator pitch is Darkseid is gone as we learn through the events of All In, and essentially that has put this corner of the multiverse into a disbalance, and that triggers the advent of a alien species who consider it their job to reset parts of the multiverse that they feel have fallen out of balance. And their advent has consequences essentially for both Apocalypse and New Genesis. And all of this is packaged and told as a prophecy to Metron. Was also told that a new child shall be awakened on earth, and this child shall bear eight gifts from various immortals across the universe, to fight whatever great battle awaits at the end. Um, is this child a hero? Is this child a villain? Nobody knows, including the leaders of Apocalypse and New Genesis, and that sort of sets both planets into a spiral um, of conflict and espionage and counter-espionage and all of that. Um, Essentially, though, at the heart of it, this is a story that asks the question: if the heroes of the DCU were given a responsibility to raise a child who they knew was going to be all powerful,
Mm,
um, who would you trust with that task, and what gifts would they give this child?
exactly. I mean, I think we see that predominantly in the trading of Scott Free and Orion in the Kirby's original series.
Hmm.
Orion being Darkseid's son, given over to Highfather. So at first he's rabid. He has this disfigured face,
Hmm.
and Highfather had just said hate has no place here, and that where I'm going to raise you as my son, and vice
Hmm.
versa with Scott Free. I mean, it's something that is learned through nurture, but
Hmm.
what is the individual's nature is something that has
Is
very
also
much
such
interested
a
me.
is also such an act of trust, right?
Mhm.
To take a child that, for all practical purposes, is born off a creature that you think is inherently evil,
Mm-hmm.
and yet to have the faith that no, I can show good to this child and I can raise them and they will be fine. Um, that kind of faith is potentially easy for a god to show, but what happens when you ask that faith of quite human characters and characters who think of themselves not as gods? And so, yeah, I'm very fascinated by that idea. I'll be honest, like I borrow it from the Indian end of the, or sort of the Hindu end of the world
Mm-hmm.
mythology, which says the last avatar of God shall be born on earth in the darkest age, and he shall meet eight immortals who shall grant him, seven immortals who shall grant him eight gifts to fight whatever final battle. So I've just taken that structure and gone, great,
That's
I'm going to apply it to new gods here.
that's exactly what was so inspired whenever I had seen you talk about it, that you were bringing in Indian mythology comparatively to, Kirby was pulling from a lot, but
Yeah.
Greco-Roman and Norse mythology. I thought it's just an inspired decision to, go about that path, but then also injecting some of yourself into that, you know. Uh,
Yeah, and I feel like the thing that is exciting for me is even though I would say Greek mythology is far more complex than our contemporary understanding of it. We tend to think of characters as binary. It's a good guy, this is a bad guy. This is a good god, this is a bad god. And certainly, I think in distilling it to the comic book form, although characters like Orion and Mr. Miracle are complex and have layers,
mhm.
but the archetypal characters tend to be a little one-dimensional, with Highfather always being a good guy and
Yeah.
Darkseid always being a bad guy. Um, and I think Indian mythology kind of lends itself to no one is good or bad. Everyone has this sort of karmic balance within them, and whatever actions they shall visit upon this universe, those actions shall circle back and shall be repaid in full by
Yeah.
karma. And so I find that idea to be quite exciting as well, because inherently the protagonist of this, or sort of longer term protagonist of this idea, is someone that we very purposefully don't define as good or bad.
Mhm.
So without spoiling too much, I think the curious thing we do is, what if New Genesis thought this kid was going to be bad?
Mhm.
And what if Apocalypse thought this kid was going to be their next dark side? And what if the tables were turned in that sense? If New Genesis sees him as a threat, then Apocalypse sees him as a savior. And yet we want this child to be a good person because of the nature of what we want from superhero stories. So that
Yeah.
kind of complexity, that kind of, I don't know how this is going to turn out, is very exciting to write.
It's just exciting to hear you talk about it like that. I think that uh, we do kind of categorize, especially within, big two comic stories. A lot of the time, they're they're always a villain. They're always a good guy, and when we get to see them step out of that role is what's always interesting to me. And I
Mm,
think that specifically in Kirby's early work, as you can see, I love Kirby. But in the New Gods, it was showing, before Apocalypse and New Genesis, they were in this war. They were taking out more sides than not.
mm,
And it's not until Highfather found religion realistically and finding the
mm,
source that he was able to cast that out. But there's the issue with Orion, where uh, one of the characters he practically beat to death. And as he devolves into his anger, his face
mhm,
deforms more back to its original state. And I always thought that that was the inherent hatred coming out in the character, And I think that in my personal reading, I think a lot of it's surrounding Kirby and seeing, he has that in him and he's not
Mm,
defined completely by that. And so
mm,
whenever you have somebody like, say Light Ray comparatively to Orion, it
yeah.
brings out the good in Orion, but he doesn't feel like he lives up to that standard. So I think, morality is, I mean, it's intertwined with New Gods all the way through and through, where nothing is always as it's presented to be. So,
Yeah, but also like I'm less interested in the morality of it and
mhm,
more interested in the idea of responsibility, right?
mhm,
So Orion knows what his face really looks like.
yeah,
And but Orion also knows that he wants to be a good guy, if you will.
yeah,
But also he knows that everyone looks up to him. He's the champion of New Genesis. Um, and surely in the quiet hours when no one's around, when he knows what his face looks like, surely he questions that there is a balance to be had between being genuinely good and being a champion at all costs.
mhm,
What if being a champion means sometimes you have to show your ugly face? And um what responsibility does that bear on his personality, and does he want to do it, or does he do it because he feels like he owes it to Highfather? These are the things that I'm more interested in. Like, I think the morality of it, because New Gods is such a long running title, is
yeah,
already kind of established. Like I don't have to do work in trying to explain to readers whether they should perceive Orion as a good guy or a bad guy.
yeah,
In fact, I think my starting point is everyone perceives Orion as a good guy who, sometimes bends the rules because of his nature, but I'm more interested in like what does that do to you as a person, knowing that actually you have this kind of beast within you, if you will.
exactly. And I mean, there's no reason to retread the ground that's already
Yeah.
been paved. So we don't need, you know, X amount of times where they learn, where the reader learns a new revelation, just getting the baseline for the character. So
Yeah.
having that understanding, Orion's a good guy. However, this is some of the responsibility living up to where he is currently. That's just
Yeah, living up to everyone else's idea of him, despite who he really
yeah.
is an interesting character beat.
Well, and it's idealism versus realism,
Mm.
uh, in its idea. Just what would a character react to being put on this pedestal? And if every light is shining on you and you have no moments that you are individual, you can't fully express yourself, what would that do for that shining figure? And
Mm.
I absolutely love that. And actually, one of the first questions was asking about Indian mythology. So that's you already hit it right away. So I appreciate it.
Great, good.
Doing my job for me. Um, so the next thing you had spoken about in an interview, talking about writing New Gods is not uh, the same as like writing a superhero book. So, what are the difficulties in writing with this distinction, writing about gods comparatively to, Superman, Batman, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, Superman, Batman still sort of live within the confines of our world. It is a world that is familiar to us. So I don't have to do any of the groundwork in explaining to you, how Western democracy works. So when Batman functions within, and he still has to find evidence to put away someone, you understand, okay, because he has to work within the legal system. Um, all of those rules that we take for granted are up in the air when the new gods are concerned, because on New Genesis you don't need evidence. If Highfather says this person is evil, then they're evil. If Highfather says you will go out and follow my command, then you will follow that command. And I think taking that and using that to upset the rules that we accept, because also what we're doing with the story that's a little bit new is this is not a New Genesis and Apocalypse story.
Mhm.
This is a on Earth, stuff is going down. The proverbial shit is hitting the fan, and the new gods and Earth's heroes have to contend with each other's presence and somehow try and uh, um, you know save the day, if you will. And
Mhm.
so, because of that, because of these sort of conflicting worlds, I think you have to write the new gods as gods, and you have to write earthly superheroes as earthly superheroes. And um, in playing with that distinction, there's a lot of drama, there's a lot of interesting things to do. Why must we hide ourselves when we come to Earth? Why must we shrink down to this size? Why must we do any of these things? And I think sort of re-examining that equation, I think, is going to be interesting, especially in light of the fact that it's not going to be, just a Mr. Miracle living on Earth. It's at some point, I'm doing spoilers here, but about midway through the series, like, there is a proper reckoning in terms of, like, why are all these gods on Earth?
Yep. Well, and I wouldn't imagine that Earth would be very accepting of a new monarchy and Apocalypse, the quote unquote devil that has been to Earth so many times. So I'm sure that it would lead to a falling out.
Yeah, yeah.
And
So that becomes quite a point of contention, even within the good guys on Earth, whether these gods should be here. What is their place? What are the rules? Who do they answer to?
Mhm.
Do they answer to Superman? But is Superman the authority here, combined, with all the combined forces of, Orion, Light Ray, High Father? Like, is that a power equation we're willing to accept? So these kinds of questions start becoming very interesting.
Yeah. And I think earlier previously I had started making my way through a lot of Superman comics, and I had come upon New Krypton, and a relatively similar concept, but it was an entire new civilization uh, being on Earth, and the ostracizing of Superman and not seeing himself as a symbol,
Mm.
or the Earth's reaction basically saying he is the one good one out of all of them. And it's high stakes political. And I think that, that is what is the most interesting with that kind of type of storytelling, where how does
Everything they
everyone
say
react?
not to bring into dinner conversation. We've covered politics and religion right off the bat, so that's great.
Hey, that's exactly what I love talking about. Um, so going on, we had touched on it briefly, but I wanted to get your take. So the trade between Orion and Scott Free,
Mm,
and you had talked about how it would impact their development. Um,
mm.
what's your opinion on that concept? Because there is historical context for it.
Yeah.
Why do you think that this catalyst was so important for the development of both Scott and Orion?
I mean, it goes to I mean, maybe this is not true of everybody, but I love the idea that parents are the first to damage their children. We all are people of distinct shapes, and our shapes are made by the hands that hold us when we are still moldable and putty, and um, we have not been hardened and tempered in the fires of this world. And I don't think, even in my reading of the existing New God stuff, I don't think anyone's really gotten into, like, okay, how did that damage you as a person?
Mhm.
Um, the Tom King Mr. Miracle stuff kind of touches upon it, but in its very contained way. Um, I wanna touch on it, not from a sort of character's interiority point of view, but by putting them in situations where they have to confront that idea now.
Exactly.
So with this, again, trying to avoid spoilers, but with this new child, um, and so I think we've already established this. So Scott Free and Big Barda have a child, um, as the status quo that we begin with in this story is not canonizing Tom King's Mr. Miracle. I have to
That was a question
clarify.
I was going to ask if Jacob was their child.
No, they have a daughter called Olivia or Live Free. And
I love it so much. That's so perfect.
um, and so yeah, we'll get into that. But on one hand, Scott Free has a child to raise, but he has no idea how to be a father because he never had a father in the classical sense. Um, on the other hand, there is this child that is now in the eye of the storm, not his daughter, but this new god
Mhm.
who's in the eye of the storm, and he has the ability to intervene. But does he abandon his newfound family to go play hero and have this adventure? Um, or does he abandon this child? In which case, would he be abandoning a version of himself? Because was he not a child in the eye of the storm at some point in time?
And he
And so
needed a
these,
savior at that point.
yeah, and so these become questions that he needs to answer now because he's all grown up and he's a dad and he's got to make these choices. And what does that mean? Does he run away? Does he? We shall see.
I'm definitely looking forward to it. So, going into New Gods, and more of the Kirby of it all, how do you approach maintaining Kirby concepts while also making an original V Kegel joint? Is it not intimidation, but just not rehashing what Kirby had done and making something new and thought provoking in the same way?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think also these are products of their time, right? So what's thought provoking and how you provoke thought in 2024 is very
Mhm.
different from what was thought provoking in the 70s and the 80s.
Yeah.
And I think as the eras change, your concerns change, and so naturally the nature of science fiction and the nature of storytelling also changes. So I have no doubt this won't read like any New Gods stuff that has come before.
Mhm.
Um, as for taking Kirby concepts, honestly, this is probably because I have zero intimidation. Is I just take whatever interests me. In the end, I'm not trying to, trying to earn my keep at the altar of Kirby or anything of that sort. So I like this idea of children being traded and now being forced to confront their own ideas of parenthood and paternity and nature versus nurture.
Mhm.
So I take that. I love this kind of throwaway incidental world building, like page 46, panel 2 has an idea which only exists within that panel, and you never hear of it again. But maybe 10 years down the line, some other writer comes in, looks at that panel and goes, oh, that's very interesting. I want to write a story about that. So that kind of world building, I think, is particularly exciting in comics. For me, it has always been particularly exciting. This idea that your ideas are not precious and you just kind of throw them on the page, which is how I think Kirby built this world.
Mhm.
He wasn't precious about his ideas. He didn't go, oh, I've designed this one character, Steppenwolf, and I'm gonna devote 6 issues to the history of Steppen. No, Steppenwolf shows up for like 4 panels, and then you don't see him for a while, but you're left wondering, like, oh, who's this character? Why does he dress like that? Why did he show up? Why did he kill this person? Um, and you only pick up these little pieces as you read, and so it encourages you to pay attention and build stories in your own head, and the world feels much bigger than what is happening.
Hmm.
on the pages. And I feel like a lot of modern day comic books, and certainly modern day sort of plotty Hollywood blockbuster driven narratives, sort of try to explain everything. Like everything must make sense. Why is this person here? Why? What is their motivation? Everything has to be set on the table for you before you come in. And I don't want to. I don't want to function like that. I want to function like Kirby did, and
Yeah,
throw concepts at you. You know, it's before you've grasped the first one. I'm already on the 10th one. Um,
exactly.
so that's what I've taken from the Kirby part of it all. This idea that the world is wondrous and full of possibilities. And
Hmm.
I mean, I don't know if we're going to keep it in the comic, but I'll give you an example. Um, the new gods communicate with each other and they can speak. Certainly, High Father can speak through these mother boxes. At one point, I had an idea to have a god there who was just mouths. He has no other, but he's just mouths everywhere. And he is called the Mother Speaker. And essentially he is the conflux of all the active mother boxes. So he communicates with them all. That's all he does. He's the god of talking to mother boxes. But that kind of crazy world building,
Yeah.
um, that is incidental and beautiful and wonderful. Like I always tell people, like when they ask me, well, how do you feel about cosmic story? How do you feel about space stories?
Hmm.
And and don't get me wrong, I love Star Wars, but I'm more excited by Star Trek than Star Wars.
Yeah.
Because I'm more excited by like, what is this strange planet we've landed on, more than, which empire is going to defeat which planet. And
Yeah.
so that kind of world building, which I think really is the energy of the Kirby books, is something we're taking as well.
And that's definitely something that I appreciate because it's the creative team trusting the reader to come along with them. And for my reading, I don't need a lot of hand holding. I don't need all of the ins and outs. So whenever you had talked about, how grating it is for over explanation of ideas and
Mm,
concepts, that's really something that I latched onto. And then another portion that I really liked that you had brought up previously in a different interview is talking about how you hate nostalgia.
mm.
And I agree 110%. And I'm formulating my ideas realistically into it. But can you talk about why? Can you explain why you hate nostalgia from your point of view?
Because essentially it is antithetical to my idea. I enjoy things. I love watching things evolve. I love watching things be born and blossom and grow. Um, and nostalgia is the opposite of those things. You might have a new flower in front of you blossoming for the first time, and yet you're thinking of that rose that was outside your window 16 years ago when it was raining. And so essentially, if I may use suspect language, nostalgia is like mental masturbation. You're just thinking back to a time that you were tempted by, and you're constantly scratching that itch. Whereas I think the way to really sort of enjoy life as a human being and grow is to be present in the moment and look at what's in front of you and try and find things in the here and now that are exciting and interesting.
Mhm.
The same applies to any kind of art. People come in and say, oh, rock used to be great. There's no real rock and roll now. And I'm like, nah, man, you don't know. Like I've found 6 bands last week that are doing classic rock and roll, but doing their non-nostalgic, interesting take on it.
Exactly.
And people have these opinions because they don't put in the effort to find something new that excites them. And so the reason they don't put in that effort is because it's easy to just go back and think about that time you played that song and it was great, or think about that time you read that comic book for the first time and it was great, and back in the 70s they don't make great comics anymore, you
Hmm.
know. And this is a manifestation of intellectual laziness.
That's that's basically been my primary point. I've been having conversations about this and why nostalgia and as it relates to the comic book industry is grating for myself, because everybody will say the modern comics aren't good, and you ask them what they've read, what writers, are you reading independent work, are you, and they just say, oh, painting with a broad brush, it was so much better in the 70s 80s, and you look back at what they're referencing, they're highly political works, and but they denigrate the works that are coming out now because they are political in some form or fashion,
Mm,
or even just the representation in comics is somehow political. But all of these works, it's just reflecting on a time that you enjoyed it. So if I read Spider-Man as a kid, I'm and I look back at it now, like, yeah, I had a great time reading it as a kid, but also I can appreciate the comics that are coming out at this same moment and say, they're different writers, different stories, but this is still great. And independent works ranging from, the 70s, 80s, and whatnot, they're, I think we're at the pinnacle. Not the pinnacle, because I think that would say that there would be a fall soon, but I think
mm.
we're at the best place we've ever been for independent stories, and actually being able to formulate that on an ongoing basis. I mean, as the series that I've read from you with like Layla Starr and Rare
Mm.
Flavors, I've just been completely blown away. And this isn't just singular to you, but the independent publishers overall.
Sure.
And so I always the main uh, core concept that I have about nostalgia is regressive, and we can't go back. No matter, so we need to move forward. So we need to be progressive. And so we have to
Mm.
think about the now and we have to think about the future. But thinking about the past isn't going to benefit anybody. So that's been my main
Yeah,
thing.
look, I
But
mean, I mean, conceptually and philosophically, you're not wrong. Like, yeah, face direction, always face direction of travel makes
mhm,
complete sense. The, but I want to be careful. Like, I think we conflate a couple of things when we talk about nostalgia. And
mhm,
nostalgia as personal enjoyment, more power to you. You want to spend time, loving something you read in the 70s, go for it.
yeah,
My personal problem with that is that I think it's lazy, right? As I explained before, I think
mhm,
it's lazy, but it's not wrong. No one said you had to be like me and put an effort into enjoying everything. Maybe you want to come back home, sit down on a couch and read a 80s pulp novel. Do it. No problem. But I think the problem, or the greater problem, starts occurring when you think the industry should cater to that. And I think that's very dangerous, because then you keep making the same things you've been making since the 80s. And at some point, the world changes. At some point, yeah, maybe there are still 50-year-old guys reading comics. I'm sure there are.
mhm.
But are they still going to be reading comics when they're 80? Are they still going to be reading comics when they're 90?
And
What
are we
happens when they're
catering to the same audience?
well, I mean, yeah, if you're catering to nostalgia, you're essentially catering to the same audience, right?
Mhm.
Like, you're not really creating a new readership. You're depending on an existing readership, and you're kind of maybe trying to pull in on some weird sort of hereditary level, like, okay, if your dad likes this, you probably, I mean, that's kind of what these kind of giant franchises that have, look
Yeah.
at James Bond, look at any of those big franchises that have been around for a long time, but they're all struggling. They're all finding things difficult. And I think it's because they're dependent on this idea that the person who enjoyed me when they were 20 are still enjoying me when they're 45. How do we keep them sort of hooked in when they're 70? at some point that's going to fail.
Yeah.
And when that fails, you're going to fall off a cliff because you've done nothing to engage all those people who were 16, 17 when your readership was 40, 45, you know?
Yeah.
And the 17-year-old, it doesn't want to hear the comics were great in the 1970s. They were like, I wasn't even born yet. It's fine. I don't care. And so I think the endeavor must always be to tell good stories.
Mm-hmm.
Good is a subjective thing, but I think largely it's easy to recognize good work regardless of what your personal opinions are in terms of what you like or you don't like. So we must encourage the industry to make good things, but to say that the only good things were the things that came from the 80s is again intellectually lazy and this time dangerous for the industry. So
Exactly.
by all means, go sip your Kool-Aid on your own. Don't ask everybody else to sip from the same Kool-Aid, you know.
Well, and that's exactly why I was so excited when the announcement came, because we've had Kirby before. We've had other
Mm-hmm.
creators on New Gods. I don't want the same I don't want Kirby repackaged over and over and over again. We've had Kirby and his entire modus operandi was he did what was true to himself. I
Yeah.
want a creator that is writing for these characters or just stories in general that are writing their ideas and not
Mm.
trying to replicate another creator's ideas. And that's
Yeah.
what
Why
I
would you?
greatly
Because
appreciate.
also just inherently boring to do. Like, why would you, when given the opportunity to write 16 issues of your own, um, I'm not saying this is a 16 issue series,
Mm-hmm.
but why would you, when given the opportunity to write any number of issues of your own, go like, I'm going to write them exactly the way this other person did? No, why about how about you just write them the way you do, you know?
Yeah.
And I think valuing your own voice and your own ideas is probably a good start there.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's a rare trait among creators, and I think it's one that the industry should probably encourage more than it does.
That's what automatically sells a creator and makes me a fan for life. Like I was saying earlier, like Cy Spurrier and yourself, I feel like so much of the series that I read from the both of you are individual perspectives, and I can't uh, assimilate them to somebody else. You're not recreating a Morrison. You're not redoing a Kirby, and that is exactly what I'm looking for. No, none of the top creators that I love dearly, none of them were trying to replicate somebody else, and that's
Yeah,
what makes me a fan of new and generating discussion and
yeah,
ideas. That's
yeah. Like I was talking about this on Twitter the other day. I recently found a band called Greta Van Fleet.
mhm.
And I found them because Robert Plant was talking about the vocalist of Greta Van Fleet in an interview, and he was like, "This kid is blessed with a voice that sounds like it was gifted straight from my mouth." Um, and so I was like, "Wow, someone who sounds exactly like Robert Plant," and yeah, the lead singer sounds exactly like Robert Plant, but
Mhm.
they did that for one album. And then they realized very quickly that this is not a cover band. This is not something that's going to sustain you beyond your early success. And you look at their most recent album and they don't sound like Led Zeppelin. They sound like themselves, which I think is always a sign of someone who takes their art and their creativity seriously.
Exactly. You can only go so far being a cover band.
Yeah.
And at some point, the audience is going to want something new and progressing
Yeah.
it forward. And that's what is definitely just,
I mean,
it's
even if the audience
wonderful.
doesn't like, God, it'd be boring as hell just doing
Yeah.
your entire career as a Led Zeppelin cover band,
Yeah. How can you be creative if you're just trying to trace
to
after somebody
replicate.
else?
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
So getting back to New Gods just a little bit,
Yeah.
outside of Kirby, whenever you were doing the research, did you have a specific series that you were coming back to that uh, really influenced? I know a lot of people cite uh, some of the burn and whatnot, but was there a specific series that rang true to you?
So this is a weird thing. I read the Fourth World Omnibus. I read the New Gods Forever People, Mr. Miracle. I read Simonson's Orion. I think they were originally backups, but then were later collected into an anthology thing called like Stories of the New Gods or
Mm-hmm,
something. Um, and that was about the bulk of my research when it came to like what stories, what series did I look at?
mm-hmm,
Because I knew what my story was, and my story doesn't really benefit from taking from these places.
yeah.
It's great to see the characterizations. It's great to see Kirby concepts. It's great to see, what are boom tubes? How do they work? And what's a mother box? And who's the person who invented the mother box? All that stuff is great to pick up from your research.
Mm-hmm,
But I know what my story is because I'm writing it. And if you look at influences for that, then my influences are probably old Ramayana Mahabharat stories from Indian mythology, Dune, Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings. So, if anything, when you start reading this, it's going to feel like a confluence of those stories, but set in the world that Kirby created, if that makes sense.
I love it. Using Kirby as the starting point and then formulating from there. That's I'm in. I mean, you can only sell me so many times, but I appreciate it. So going into some of your work, your background is very much utilized within a lot of the stories. So like Rare Flavors and Layla
Mhm.
Starr and Swamp Thing. So how do you go about balancing your perspective while also telling the stories that are going to resonate with others?
I mean, you don't really,
Mm-hmm,
because your hope is that I'm a human being and the other people reading my stories are human beings. And there is a commonality of experience, of life, of the things we care about that happens across societies, across cultures. Like, surely it doesn't matter what culture you come from, but as a parent, you still care about the well being of your children. Surely, no matter what culture you come from, the idea of being 17, 18, having ambition, going out into the world and trying to make something of yourself. These are things that are common across cultures. And ideally, what you want to do is you want to express your experience through your stories and then let it go and trust that somebody else will take your expression and translate it through their own experiences to their lives, and it will make sense and meaning to them. Otherwise, I don't think you can read Layla Starr and appreciate it if you don't understand it on a fundamentally human level, because I don't do anything to explain what Indian culture is. I don't do anything to ground you in the reality of India. You could never have been anywhere near Asia and read Layla Starr and have an emotional reaction to it. And I think really that's the key, is to find the level of universality and trust in the power of the human experience when you're telling stories. Um, if I were tempering my own background or culture or interest in any way, then I would be tempering my own enthusiasm and excitement to tell the stories.
mm-hmm,
So I don't. I think issue one, you are in India. There's a temple in India, and there are mercenaries, and there are gods, and yeah, I don't worry about, is this going to be sort of challenging for people who have never seen it. No, that's the whole point.
mm-hmm.
Stories are supposed to be challenging. You're supposed to look at things you've never seen and go like, "Ah, this is exciting," you know?
Yeah, and I I just read Rare Flavors for the second time just a couple of days ago in preparation, and just coming back to the last issue, it's just so deeply human and
Mm,
an experience of, being able to formulate that all into one uh cohesive story, but then that final issue was just a emotional gut punch, and I deeply appreciated that. And then the ability to weave in Indian culture, it just it came through on a level that, you don't need the subtext, or the background, I mean.
yeah.
But it's just a fundamental understanding, and you don't need the over explanation, and we can just go with this demon that's helping somebody make a documentary. And that's the realistic pitch, and then finding out the reason behind, making that first film about his mother. It just
Mm,
really, I mean, it's something that anybody can relate to, but it's not writing to be relatable. Is that,
mm.
would you say that's about right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you want to be relatable, but you want to be relatable on a human level, not necessarily in the specifics, but in the underlying commonality of experience we were talking about. I think relatability on a fundamentally human level is good. I think relatability on familiarity with the specifics of the story is kind of overrated. Like,
Mhm.
really, I think I'm quoting Raymond Carver, maybe, um, when I say when he said the writer's job is to take the familiar and make it fascinating and unfamiliar in any way they can, which is true to an extent. But then why take the familiar? I don't need to take the familiar. I can take the fascinating because I understand the things about my culture that fascinate me. And so I hope that they are just as fascinating to someone who's never experienced it.
Mhm. I I agree. You had spoken about there being a fractured relationship between Orion and Scott Free, and then I had also seen, the brothers' fractured relationship within Swamp Thing. So
Hmm.
what interests you about, those kind of familial bonds, and how they decay or how they inform our personal motivations?
I mean, certainly in this case, everything, right? Like I think the establishing premise of Kirby's conflict is familial bonds. Even going all the way back to the fact that Highfather and Darkseid are seen essentially as brothers, and so um, I think that sort of repeating pattern of sibling rivalry turning into world-shattering consequences um, is a thing that I noticed in Kirby's work, and so it made sense to pick it up here as well.
Mhm.
But beyond that sort of structural commonality, how are you not interested in siblings who are both driven by each other but also dismayed by each other, right?
Mhm.
And it's such the anime fan in me is such a battle shonen theme. Um, this sense of like, yes, we are brothers, but we are also enemies, but we are also absolutely friends, but we are also rivals. And that kind of feeling is such a human thing. It's such a complex thing. Like, I didn't have brothers when I was growing up. I had an older sister, but I had cousins, and we were really, really close. Um, Only a couple of years apart in age, and we were the best of friends. But also, my God, the fights we had. Um, and so I think you have to take that because it interests me now. I look back at it and I look at Orion and Scott Free, and it reminds me of me and my cousins.
Mhm.
And so yeah, I think that's what makes the story, as I said, relatable on a fundamentally human level. Like you may love New Gods, you may not love you may love superheroes, you may not, but everybody loves the story of two brothers trying to kind of contend with one conflict in different ways and having to contend with their own pasts and histories. I mean, if anything, the Orion Scott-free drama here, the thing that comes to my head immediately is that film. I think it was Warrior,
Mhm.
um, with Tom Hardy and God, Joel Edgerton, Joel
Yes,
Edgerton and Tom Hardy,
I
right?
just picked it up too.
Yeah. Um, and that is Orion and Scott Free to me in a
Mhm.
lot of ways, and I feel like we're gonna see some of those moments. We're gonna see those moments of like, yeah, okay, we're gonna solve this in the ring. We're gonna solve this with some punches. But
Yeah.
we're also going to see moments of like, no, nobody understands me better than my brother, you know?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Quick side note, I desperately need to know what your favorite animes are now.
I mean, I don't really do favorites because they change from time to time, but
Current
I have
preferred.
I have watched the vast majority of Battle Shonen that is out there.
Mhm.
I have watched the vast majority of sort of historical slash alt history samurai dramas that are out there.
Mhm.
Um, and then I've watched the sort of stranger one or two here and there, like Way of the House Husband or Spy Fam, Spy X Family,
Mhm.
or Bungo Stray Dogs, which was a more recent obsession of mine. So yeah, so I wouldn't say my anime viewing is exhaustive. I've watched a lot of animated films
Mhm.
that are wider in terms of their genre scope, but in terms of serialized anime, I think yeah, I'm a sucker for the battle shonen themes.
Have you watched One Piece? And if so, what's your opinion on it?
I have. I've tried multiple times to get into it, and
Uh-huh.
I never can't seem to make it past the initial seasons just because I think it feels a little dated to me, that older stuff. And then
Mhm.
I never go to like the newer because I know it's been running forever. So
Yeah.
I never go to the newer stuff because I'm just like, but I'm not gonna have any context.
Yeah.
Um, so I just find it impenetrable to sort of get into, to be honest. And it's okay. There are a few things like that that I can't jump in. Like also cannot get into Dragon Ball for whatever reason. So
There's
yeah.
a lot there. There's a lot with One Piece as well. It was
Yeah,
uh it was last year, and a friend of mine had recommended One Piece, and I was watching it in our living room, and my wife was doing her nails, and she got about halfway through, and she was like, "Oh, no, you need to pause that because I want to be watching it." And I
right.
think as it sits right now, we're on like episode 800 and something like
Yeah,
that. It's
see,
it's
like
been a year.
as soon as you go 800, my brain's like, maybe later.
Yeah, that's how we felt originally. She was like, "Oh, there's a few seasons." And I was like, there's a lot of seasons. This has been
Yeah,
going since we were born. Like we were 2 years old
yeah,
whenever this released. So
yeah, yeah.
that was definitely one that I had to get your take on. I think that you would like it, but it's slow in the beginning. And this is a lot to say, after like the first 100 episodes, it increases its pace and you start really attaching. But I understand it's
Right.
uh it's dense. It's dense,
I've
but
made
it's
it
great.
nowhere near the first 100 episodes, so
Oh, it's it blows by fast.
yeah, I'm sure at some point, I'm sure at some point I'll just be like, okay, I'm gonna
Yeah.
get into this.
Well, one day, and then I need your thoughts on it.
Sure.
So getting back into New Gods. So the entirety of New Gods is about fatherhood and familial bonds, like we've been talking about.
Yeah, the certainly the relatable human drama within it
Mhm.
is largely familial. Yeah.
So, how do you feel that the women in the story, how do you feel like their importance is able to be presented in that way? I mean, we have mother boxes, we have
Hmm.
like the good with Big Barda and the bad with, Granny Goodness.
Hmm.
What is your personal perspective, because the series is about fatherhood? Where do you think that the women come into play in that aspect?
Yeah, but I mean, fatherhood is not a thing that exists in vacuum, though. Like, there is no fatherhood if you don't contend with the idea of a mother being around somewhere.
Mhm.
And although my obsessions are with fathers and their relationships with their sons and their relationships and the relationships of their sons amongst each other and all of that, I don't think any of it is possible if you don't have um and not just women. I mean, like, if you don't have important characters as part of this cast, and I don't necessarily think of Big Barda as playing like a woman's role in the cast, but she is Scott Free's partner. He is incomplete without her, and whoever he is now is a reflection of his relationship with her as well. And so, because otherwise, it would be like insinuating these characters haven't changed at all
Mhm.
in all this time that has passed, if they're still playing out the same struggles they were playing out when they were, teenagers or kids. No, this is a grown person with a child of his own. He loves Big Barda, and he trusts her, and he worries about her equally. She worries about him, and their ways of dealing with the problems that will show up are not the same. And that will cause friction and conflict, or that will cause resolution and relief. And so all of these characters, I think, will be equally important. Again, Granny Goodness will be equally important. There will be Furies. The Furies will be there, and as always, I can't. I've lost count of the number of times someone was in the Furies, and then they turned and became a good person, and now they
Yep.
have joined. Um, and so I'm kind of wary of repeating that note, but I like the idea that Darkseid can never sort of really trust the Furies because they keep leaving him and joining the other side. So
Mhm. I
um,
I feel like it breeded rabid independence. That's my take on all of that with the Furies and Barda. I mean, they're not leaving because they're going to be they're following another man. They're leaving for their own self betterment, and I felt like that was, it was poignant
yes,
in the
but
70s.
also, like, Granny Goodness is supposed to be this master at
Mhm.
brainwashing and training and sort of indoctrinating, and, like, come on, like, your track record is pretty bad right now.
Yeah,
So
she's not doing very well for her whole thing that she does.
yeah,
It's like a
exactly.
50% chance that it's
Exactly.
not
But
going to
also,
work.
like, I think, I mean, not to be too tongue in cheek, but I think it's also a result of, it's a writer's favorite trope, right? Like,
Mhm.
someone coming over from the bad side to the good. You made it.
Yeah.
And so I think we've found over the years that writers have maybe repeated that note a few times. Um, but no, I just find it amusing that maybe there's something of interest there, because, even on Apocalypse, the Hunger Dogs exist, and there's always this undercurrent of rebellion. And so, what is it about the Furies that rebellion is inherent to their existence? And I love that idea. So
Mhm.
maybe if we have room to explore, we will. Like, I'm also aware that, you know this has to begin with some measure of focus. And so, people, every time I post something on Twitter or social media somewhere, people are always like, is this person going to show up? Is this going to happen? Are you going to address this? I'm like, guys, not in the first 5 issues, certainly not.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Yeah,
And also,
well,
like, in which case, I haven't thought about what I'm doing for issue 6 yet.
mhm. Well, I'll be happy because, Darkseid's first appearance is in Jimmy Olsen. So if he was just taking pictures of them being on Earth or what have you, I'll be happy as a clam. I'll float the book sales just by myself. I'll take out a
We
loan, just
shall,
me.
we shall, we shall see. We shall see.
Well, I think we're winding down, so I just had a, one or two more questions.
Yeah.
Um, and they're very easy. So or you post a lot about the songs that you're writing,
Hmm.
or the songs that you're listening to while you're doing the writing process. Do you have like individual playlists for different series that you build up over time, or is it just how you're feeling that day? This is what's inspiring this script.
No, I have playlists that sort of construct themselves over time.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a why don't I do this? I've got, let's see. Sorry, I'm just looking at my Spotify playlists right now. Middle of this call.
Hey.
Um, yeah, I've got a mm, couple of projects that I can't talk about have playlists. I've got
Mm-hmm.
a Vigil playlist. I've got a Swamp Thing playlist. I've got a Blue and Green playlist. Um, I've got a Justice League Dark playlist. Couple of things that I worked on that never came to fruition. I got a Gotham Nocturne playlist. I've got a Black Mamba playlist, Paradiso playlist. So yeah, yeah. Weirdly, my Spotify playlist is a good record of the books that I have worked on.
Well, if you ever wanted to release those, I would be so
I have in the
happy.
past. I don't do because it's this kind of therapeutic sacred activity building your playlist. So I don't
Mhm.
release them until I'm like, okay, this covers pretty much the entire span of what I've listened to. But when it is in this sort of nascent stage, it is mine and no one shall know
Yes.
it.
I feel the same way about specific playlists that I cultivate, and I'm like it's not done yet. I
Hmm.
still have to make sure that this flows good.
Yeah.
Um so do they vary in genres based on the work? Specifically, like New Gods, would that be classic rock or new wave or what have you?
I try not to do the whole nostalgia thing and have really sort of classic songs in there because it feels a little bit like cheating because you're like, yeah, look, okay, I get it. There's only so many times I can listen to AC/DC. Um,
Yep.
so I try to find new bands and new songs.
Hmm.
And so my playlists tend to be uh, of newer things largely. So like my New Gods playlist right now has a lot of Greta Van Fleet in there, some Mars Volta in there, um, some Black Keys in there. Um, let's see what else is there. Yeah, I've got some Bowie, classic. Um,
You have to have Bowie if you're going to do New Gods, of course.
yeah, yeah. Uh, and then I've got some. Hang on a second. No, that doesn't belong here. Oh yeah, I've got some Sampha. He's a do you know of Sampha?
I've tangentially heard.
Yeah, he's a producer, songwriter, British musician,
Mhm.
who's worked with a bunch of sort of famous rap guys, but he does his own stuff and yeah, I love it. I got a little bit of him in there. I got some bits and pieces from the Black Panther soundtrack in there as well. So yeah.
Well, you have to have those in there because that's a great album as a whole.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, that I think that just about does it. That I really just wanted to know about the differing genres because all the majority of the books that you release and that you're writing, I feel like they can't necessarily uh be deemed all the same thing. If I'm buying a
Sure,
Ram V book, it's not gonna be, always crime dramas, always, one
sure.
thing or another. So I was just wondering
Yeah,
how
yeah.
genre of music played in.
The visual is mostly sort of new age electronica, adult alternative electronic music,
Mhm.
ambient electronica, if you will. And the Swamp Thing was kind of a mishmash of horror soundtracks, like bits and pieces of Hereditary were in there, and then there was a lot of actually not maybe this is not horror, but there was a lot of soundtrack from the Revenant movie in
Mhm.
there. Um, and then let's see what else. Yeah, Gotham Nocturne was a lot of classical music, some opera, some modern classical as well. And then, oh yeah, One Hand Six Fingers was a lot of sort of adult alternative, but like more grounded.
Mhm.
So like I don't know, the kind of music you'd expect to hear in like a dusty old bar by the side of some highway. That has a sort of timeless quality, but also that sort of ennui to it, and that sort of grit and dust in the voice. So a lot of songs like that. Yeah.
I I love it. Well,
Like today, I sent in a outline for a prose story I've been asked to write, and I quite literally sent my editor like, you should read my outline with this song playing in the background. So, and that was part of the Hell or High Water soundtrack. So there you go.
hey,
But it's a
well, I'll
sci-fi
be
story.
I'll be looking forward to it. That sounds
Right.
wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming on and letting me do this. I really appreciate it. Just letting me nerd out and just ask you all of these questions.
Yeah, my pleasure.
New Gods is going to be able to be pre-ordered, and it releases December 18th. Is that correct?
It releases December 18th. It is available now for pre-order. So, and we will of course be shouting out about it over the coming weeks. But yeah, pretty much you could pick up a phone, drop an email, call your retailer, let them know
Mhm.
that you would like a copy of issue one. It is a book that is notoriously a hard sell. I convinced DC over 3 years to let me finally do it. Um, so it would be a pleasant, wonderful surprise if we kind of reminded everyone as to why the new gods have this kind of staying power, and
Mhm.
why they're a wonderful piece of storytelling history. And so yeah, hopefully that inspires people, both old readers and new, to go out there and support the book.
Well, I know that I've already called two of my shops, and I'm making sure that they're pre-ordering as much as they possibly can because I know it's going to be a
Oh
huge
yeah,
hit.
speaking of, because I know we touched on this subject very early on with Jorge Fornes being a guest artist.
Yes.
So the idea behind the guest artists, and I think you will dig this, is I didn't want this book to look like a Kirby knockoff,
Hmm.
right? But also, you're doing New Gods. There has to be some bits of Kirby in there.
Hmm.
And so the whole thing with the guest artists is the guest artists are my editor's ideas of people working in contemporary comics whose work you can look at and draw a straight line from Kirby and go like, of course, this person has evolved here because of what Kirby did
Hmm.
all those years ago. So I think you can look at Jorge's work and certainly go like, yes, I can see the Kirby influence. Um, there are a few others. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to announce them yet, but I think I could say this. Jesse Lonergan's is a guest artist on one of the issues, and I don't know if you've seen his work at all,
Yes. Yeah.
but again, very you can tell, okay, this person loved Kirby.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, there are a few others that I don't want to drop the names before we get to announce them, but
Hmm.
they're all very exciting creators. I'm sure you can find a few if you just think to like, who would I pick if I had to do Kirby in 2024. So I think that's going to be exciting to see alongside this kind of very Euro sci-fi manga influenced Evan Cagle doing sci-fi art.
Mm.
Um, but even in that, I think the designs are very Kirby influenced. Like you've seen the Orion redesign, and I feel like that still contains the spirit of Kirby. Takes these wild swings. What is up with that helmet?
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, yeah. Um, I I love this entire exercise because I feel like it is not trying to remind people of an aesthetic that used to be. It's trying to re-energize that kind of aesthetic in comics,
Mhm.
if you will.
Well, I know that it's gonna be a success. Just hearing the way that you talk about it has just made me so much more excited. It's one thing reading the previews and whatnot, but actually hearing the creatives uh perspective on it is really what interests me the most. And
Sure.
so I appreciate it so much. Thank you so much. Did you
My
have
pleasure.
anything to plug before we go?
No, I don't think anything I'm doing in the future has been announced yet. So I've got another DC book that will come out kind of early next year, which I
Mhm.
suppose will be announced a little bit later. But it's kind of my take at doing a radical reinvention of an obscure character. I suppose it's my phase of doing that. So we'll
Mhm.
see. We'll see. Obviously, I'll plug it once it's announced, but no, I don't think I have anything to plug that has been announced quite yet.
Well, that'll be just perfect. And I will put the link to your Twitter down below. So if
Yeah,
anybody
great.
wants to follow you along the process and the journey and tell you how much they love the new gods, then go ahead and do that. But that's all. Thank you guys so much for
Thank
watching.
you.
Keep reading comics.